This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
She was just about to land a mackerel, and this big shark just came out of nowhere and just gave her a big jerk. It just cut her open like a knife going through butter.
This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. I'm John Sussman. Narrow-barred mackerel, known internationally as tanguigi or often kingfish, but in Australia as Spanish mackerel, inhabit coastal waters from Perth in Western Australia around the top end to about Bermagui in southern New South Wales. It's the largest of Australian mackerels, reaching a maximum length of about 2.5 metres and a 70-kilo weight. The upper body varies from bright blue to dark grey in colour that fades to a silvery blue over the sides. More than 40 narrow grey, blue wavy vertical bars are present on each side of the fish. The large dip in the lateral line below the second dorsal fin is a clear diagnostic feature of the narrowed barred Spanish mackerel. The regal-looking, fast-swimming Spanish mackerel is one of the fish at the top of the food chain. Its sleek, powerful torso has the look of a fighter jet, built for speed with the persona of an aggressive hunter. It's caught using hook and line trolling techniques, and its quality is generally excellent as a result. This, combined with its high oil content, facilitates a vast range of culinary options, from simple preparations to complex Japanese techniques. The thin skin, thick rounded trunk and simple bone structure also offer a broad range of cut options from fillets to cutlets. Spanish mackerel fishes are amongst the most colourful on the Australian waters. Fishing the tropical waters of northern Australia, they spend long stints at sea, often tracking schools of these hardy fish for months on end, spending long hours under the searing sun in humid conditions. Their thirsts are also understandably legendary. Bruce Wildcard Davey is himself a legend, a fiercely proud third-generation professional fisher who started his career at 16 years of age in 1975, following his father and mother and grandfather into the world of fishing. His love of fishing, his family and his beloved Spanish mackerel makes him a truly unique character in Australia's fishing history.
Good morning, so it's Bruce Wildcard calling from Cairns to talk to you about our marvellous seafood industry. So my grandfather dabbled in the fishing industry out of Wollongong, Kiama, Sydney in the early days, 40s, 50s. Both Grandfather George's sons went fishing, Uncle Keith and my father. And Mum and Dad ended up building a beautiful house down at Groomer Point on the Shellhaven-Crookhaven River. And, surrounded by these wonderful, also generational fishing families like the Inneses, old Bill, Ron Innes, Chris and Ian with the Ajaxes. We had the Gray family, Johnny and Mary Gray with the Anne Maries and the Shellhaven. And, of course, Peter and Wendy Bell there. So as a young kid growing up with all the other fishing children in what then was essentially a fishing village, 100 miles south of Sydney, supplying local East Coast New South Wales seafood into the Nowra Co-op. It was a wonderful childhood to be surrounded by all these iconic fishing families where, the whole town would show up to see the boats come in and unload onto the trucks up to Nowra, and, next morning they'd be on the market floor. So from a very, very young age, I've stood on the decks of all those wonderful boats, and I just dreamed from a young age that that's my heritage and that's my roots, and I'd follow into the fishing industry. In 1974, I left boarding school in Sydney, Newington College, and got a job on a prawn trawler up in Mooloolaba, and then 75, I ended up prawning in the Gulf of Carpentaria for banana prawns and tiger prawns, and they really were the heydays of the development of our wild capture seafood resources, and particularly in the Gulf of Carpentaria, those challenges of the early day companies and those people that used to leave Mooloolaba, Ballina, Gold Coast, Bundaberg, and travel all the way up the east coast of Queensland, do the banana prawn season. They were marvellous early days, John.
Fishermen are opportunistic hunters. Often their migratory patterns are as varied as their prey. Building a successful fishing business requires flexibility, mobility, and a natural sense of adventure to relocate from one place to another.
Dad had come up in 1969. He'd sold his fish trawler down in Greenwell Point, the Alveda, and he did a stint up in the Gulf there with CSIRO and Department of Agriculture Primary Industries, and they really were also the heyday of a past research era where there was a thirst for knowledge for all these seafood resources and the demand to develop them. So Dad did a year up in Currumba tagging prawns and doing all the research with CSIRO, and then came back in 1976, literally in the backyard at Nowra, built the Crystal Voyager, which was an 86-foot prawn trawler. Got one of the few licenses from Canberra where you could walk in and say, I wanted to go prawning in the Gulf of Carpentaria, and plonk your $100 down and got a licence before all the restrictions came in. And over the next 12 months built this fantastic, very modern steel prawn trawler for its age, 86 feet. And with my mum, my sister, my brother-in-law, my cousins, and Uncle Keith, Dad's brother, we spent 3 years from 77, 76, 79 working that. And then Mum had enough after 3 years, and my sister got pregnant, so we sold that, and I commenced a career of 4 years working for A. Raptis and Sons, Arthur Raptis, George Raptis, and Margaret Raptis in Currumba, and they certainly were the most wonderful years of, there was new technology coming into our fisheries, better engines, supply networks, from Currumba and other areas, Darwin and Weipa. And I had a wonderful career cutting my teeth in the prawning industry up until 1784. Dad and I built another 86-foot prawn trawler for the Gulf. And then with my wife Juanita and 3 young children, we continued the northern prawn fishery in the Gulf. And then, of course, as many would know, John, there was over 350 licences and vessels, 300 vessels operating in that fishery, and the economics and the sustainability came into question, and through a numerous series of buybacks over many years, as we've seen in most of our fisheries, they reduced the numbers down to the current 52, and that was quite a painful process for many, particularly the private owners that didn't have the funds to continue to reinvest in the fishery millions of dollars to buy a licence then. So Dad and I eventually sold out, and that's when I bought the Wildcard in 1991. And through the course of my fishing career, I'd seen all these wild mackerel at the back of the boat as we were cleaning the nets out on these reef systems. So it was a natural progression for Juanita and I then to go and find a little mackerel boat. We bought a little 50-foot mackerel boat in Cairns, and with 3 children, a school teacher, we took off to the Gulf, and we have had an absolute pleasure in the last 35 years pioneering large-scale offshore Spanish mackerel fishing, John. And the unique feature of that fishery, they're a beautiful pelagic fish and highly regarded, right around Asia and India and the Pacific, and of course similar king mackerel, Caravella, Scombomoris calavera in the Gulf of Mexico, very similar to our Spanish mackerel here in Australia. It was just a natural progression to, develop that fishery. Over the next sort of 10 years, I took that little 50-foot boat, cut it in half, put 5 metres in the middle, put a metre on either side and turned it into a 22-metre vessel and a home for our family. It was interesting. Juanita and I had never owned a home. So we still had our 3 young children, and the school teacher came with a child as well, a young boy, and so I had 4 on there. And we further developed out of the Queensland Gulf into the Northern Territory, and we've also got East Coast Queensland quota holdings. So we have one of the largest privately owned quota holdings across 3 separate fisheries now, and we're very proud of how we've developed that fishery, which is notable, John, by the method of capture, and that is using traditional little 5-metre inboard diesel fiberglass mackerel dories, where you have one of your crew in there, or myself, Juanita, of course, and you actually go out early in the morning for an hour, hour and a half, and we're simply trolling garfish and spoons, silver spoons, metal jigs, etc. And we actually pull every individual mackerel in by hand. It's the ultimate man on fish fishing industry, where you've got to fool that fish to take something artificial and pull it in manually on a long line, and of course pay the bills at the same time. The Gulf of Carpentaria goes from Cape York, our most northern top tip near Torres Straits, of course, and to the north in the Torres Straits you have the traditional Torres Strait Islander fisheries, and then down the east coast you have a range of fisheries, obviously Queensland managed, and then when we get to a Gulf it's a totally separate fishery for prawns, mud crab, barramundi, king salmon, grey mackerel and Spanish mackerel, so different management plans, etc., etc. Vast area. The Gulf of Carpentaria, the water is about 355,000 square kilometres, equally divided between NT and Queensland. And you only have, once you come around Cape York, you've only got the bauxite mining town of Weipa, as where you can get fuel and unload. You have numerous Aboriginal communities, Marpoon, Arakoon, Pomperau, Edward River, Goonoo, Normanton, Doomadgee, scattered through the Gulf, and they're vital for us because they've all got mobile reception, so if we're close enough we can link up with the world again, because we're quite isolated. Most of the time we don't have any communications other than the satellite phone. From Weipa, it's about 250 miles down to Corumba, which is our next supply base. And then there's literally nothing till Gove in northeast Arnhem Land, which is halfway from, Weipa to Darwin. That's our next service base, but we can't unload there. We can only get fuel 2 days a week. Other than that, it's Darwin is the only other, infrastructure available to the fishing industry. So very isolated, large, highly undeveloped. There's half a dozen mines scattered around the Gulf, mostly just cattle properties, one big cattle property, basically from the Atherton Tablelands, Cairns, right across to the Kimberleys. There's a series of large cattle properties. Very little sealed roads. The logistics of keeping food on the Wildcard and all the other fishing vessels, there's quite a process of 2 weeks before the barge on a certain day. The dryer gets delivered, the freezer gets delivered, the chiller gets delivered, the mail and all the spare parts with that vital link. And as I was mentioning, wherever the prawn trawlers and the mackerel boats and the barra boats are, once it comes around into Cape York, into that vast area, and starts unloading all the vessels. So in many ways, the whole Gulf is, it's as pristine and as beautiful as from time immemorial. It really is. It's a wild area. It's known for its gales and storms and cyclones. That's challenging. We just love it out there. To wake up every morning and watch the sun rise from the east out of the ocean, and then, spend the day fishing, pulling in mackerel, and then that pleasure in the afternoon of a wonderful day's fishing, and the snaps are full and everyone's safe, and watching the sun go down in the evening. There's nary a day, John, where I just don't think I'm the luckiest man, and the Wildcard family is the luckiest fishing family in Australia, and it certainly is.
After so many years in a single fishery, a routine can ensure both efficiency and consistency of an operation. It doesn't take away the long hours in trying, often dangerous conditions, and the need for good luck and chance.
Typical day for us, we commence our season around, all tightly restricted with quotas now, or tightly held to. And a typical day for the Wildcard is we operate a unique feature of the fishing of the Spanish mackerel fishery is scattered right through the Gulf, similar to up the east coast of Queensland, a whole series of underwater mountain chains and shoals and large reef systems. And winter, around July, the Spanish mackerel come into the Gulf. They return to the seamount that they were spawned on, 2-3 years earlier as mature 10-kilo fish. And for a typical day like us, it's up at 4:30 in the morning. Quick cup of coffee, chat around our tackle box meeting, all our safety stuff today we do. Into the freezer gear, down into the minus 42 20-ton freezer where the snaps are, and in the snap freezer will be the catch from the day before in 12-kilo cartons, all snap frozen. So we'll remove out of the snap, stack them in the hole, back out, start the main engine, check the oils, etc., anchor up, and then I've got 5 dories on a long rope behind the Wildcard, so we back up with our bait buckets. The 5 people jump into the first dory. That dory then goes and puts each person into their dory, and then they disconnect, fire up their little 30 horsepower engine, get their reels out, turn the electronics on, and then they go over to the shoal and we start searching for large schools of Spanish mackerel. Now, scattered on a hill might be 10, 12, 16 huge schools of Spanish mackerel with, 5,000 fish, 1,000 fish, 10,000 fish. And the trick's for each story to go and locate its own school, and it's simply a matter of going over the school. The mackerel take the lure or the garfish. You have a foot tiller in the dory that you tap over, and next minute you're just circling around, pulling mackerel in one at a time. We usually do about an hour. Every fish that comes into the vessel is immediately icky-jimmied. And there's quite some ethics around how, in this case, seafood is handled today. And we all know that icky-jimming a tuna or a swordfish, etc., barramundi, is traditionally about enhancing the quality, and that is shutting down the nervous system of the mackerel. And that then stops the fish feeling pain. So there's also the ethics of how we handle seafood today. And this is increasingly important when we talk about community licence and expectations today, that we're humanely, capturing and treating our fish. So once we've got a fish on, 2 fish on our lines, we've only got 2 lines off each dory, you manually pull that 60-foot line into the vessel. There's no mechanics or winches or anything, and it just slides over the gunnel where you're with the lure in its mouth. So you grab it in the gills, remove the lure, return that to the water fishing again, and then we go through, with all this, how we treat the fish today is so important. The community has an expectation that we're humanely and ethically harvesting and treating the seafood, similar as what farmers are seeing with live cattle there. So it comes over, we immediately grab it, and with an icky-jimmy tool, we immediately stab it in a brain, literally within 5 seconds of coming out of the water. So then the fish is brain dead, and then we start unloading the mackerel out of the dories into the stern section, and then they're immediately placed into large, 4-ton brine tanks that are chilled down to 1, 2, 3 degrees, and that immediately brings that core temperature of that. Some of these fish are well over 30 kilos. They're huge fish. You need 2 people to get them out of the dory. So it's important with our quality control that those fish are then immediately immersed in a circulating brine. That brings that core temperature down, and then you can hold them in the brine for, up to a day. And then the processing system starts, and that in itself is so unique. Having those skills passed down by Granddad and Dad and Uncle Bill and Uncle Keith over the years of how to process a mackerel, because we're trying to optimise, obviously, what we remove from the frame. And we take the 2 flitches off, port and starboard. There's then a bloodline that runs from the tail down to the head of the fillet. We remove the bloodline out, so you now have a boneless pieces of mackerel. The skin remains on, both for identification, and it's easier for the processors to portion the mackerel with the skin on into a 12-kilo box, and then down into the snap freezers, where it takes about 8 hours to bring them down to, minus 25, minus 30, and then they're held in the store in the hold. And every month we return to Corumba or the mothership to unload that product to send on its way to market.
Even though family businesses can often demand more of workers than laws or even ethics might demand, it's vital for the stability and longevity of a family fishing business that both conditions, remuneration and opportunity are provided in equal measures. The Davey family spend many months at sea together. It's an imperative that they can enjoy their time both on and off the water.
Juanita and I have always had the view that, working remotely like we do, away for, months and months of the year, to get people to leave their families or the sacrifices all these crews make to go away to these remote fisheries in remote regions, live with a couple of old fogies like me and Juanita. You need to offer really good crew conditions. So all our cabins, all the crew's cabins have en-suites. They've got a queen-size bed, they've got a table, they've got their own private space, because I actually employ 5 women on Wildcard. And we've also, paid our crew very well and been very honest with them. We attract top market prices every year, because importantly, crew aren't coming away for the love of they all love fishing, but at the end of the day, there's the economic reality is, am I going to earn $1,000 a week, $2,000 a week, or $500? Well, so we've paid our crew well. So I'm very proud to say, young Tom is just doing his 15th consecutive mackerel season with Juanita and I on Wildcard, and his wife Jess is just doing her 5th season, and my son Tiger is doing his 13th consecutive year, and his wife Prue's doing her, I think it's her 7th year this season, and Tiger and Tom have their, Tiger and Prue have their 2-year-old daughter on the boat, following in the tradition of Juanita and I raising our children on Wildcard. And we also have young Jadie on there as well, who's doing her 4th year. And it just gives me so much pleasure seeing these young kids, because it's, fishing's very instinctive. It's an art form passed down from time immemorial. We're all basically hunters and gatherers going back through the eons of time. And it's interesting that really, in the scheme of things, mackerel fishing hasn't really changed very much. It's a little boat, trolling a little line, pulling in a fish, and then taking it to the community. So the technology, obviously, with like electronics and that's improved dramatically, as has the engineering with our engines. But the shape of the dory, the lines, the hooks, the lures, they have been the benchmark of the Spanish mackerel fishery, and of course the tuna fishery as well, and that have changed very, very little over time. So it's very an old style fishery, highly manual, highly physical, and it's, for me, it's the real thrill of the hunt, you know, like you set a trap or tow a net, and I'm certainly not saying they're any lesser of a fishing way, but actually going out and finding the school of fish by yourself in a dory, getting onto the school, getting the fish to bite, and then that thrill, that adrenaline of pulling every fish in one at a time, boom, over the side, stacking them up, and I get a little stiffy every time I jump in a dory. I just think I'm the luckiest man alive. I really am, you know.
There is something really special about wild-caught seafood. It's one of the last forms of protein that is still wild-caught, and it's a vital part of the food supply chain. More recently, the first world has awakened to the need to celebrate just how special both wild-caught seafood is, and indeed the fishers who catch it.
Look, they're vital. Look, I'm saddened to see all these little, you know, the Gippsland, Port Phillip Bay, what's happening in New South Wales, etc. We won't get too deep into the politics. It's sad to see these old generational fisheries, be they net fisheries, you know, coastal, estuary, river net fisheries, disappear. It just is the case today. Just like here in Cairns, we had sugarcane farms and in the city up until 15 years ago, and where I grew up at Greenwell Point, you know, all surrounded by dairy farms. They're now suburban, urban development today, and it is the case that the community doesn't want to see commercial fishing in professional fishing in close vicinity to the population areas. I think that's an absolute tragedy myself. We should be actually celebrating these inshore community fisheries, and we should be heritage listing them like they have in numerous fisheries overseas and saying, no, we're proud of our fishermen, we're proud of our fishing industries, we're proud that they supply us local seafood straight into our local retailers, and ensuring that they continue, because look, traditionally people want to eat wild. I think in a generation or two, with a government focus on expanding aquaculture, you know, mostly domestically here. In another generation or two, our grandkids will be eating farm barramundi and they won't even really know. And of course, the other issue with wild caught, big issue, is the cost of wild caught seafood now, as we've got less professional fishermen in the industry. Remembering 25 years ago we had over 100,000 professional fishermen in Australia. We're down to, I think it's less than 6,000 in the wild caught sector now. That trend will continue to decline. Kids will prefer to go off to university, do a double diploma in flower arranging and origami rather than follow into the family footsteps like my children have done. That's sad. And those skills that have been passed down, you know, just surviving remotely out in say the Gulf in our case, where, you know, there's 7 of us on a little 22-metre boat living in close confines, having all that food, water, fuel, you know, doing all your office work is the challenge remotely with no internet, etc. So I think what will happen, John, is there'll be key families like the Wildcard family that are fortunate the children have followed on that will continue, and they'll set the benchmark for you know, continuing to produce quality seafood. The demand is 10 times outstrips the supply. You know, there was over 2,000 mackerel dories on the east coast of Queensland 25 years ago. I doubt whether there's 10 left. I think there's only 7 mackerel dories left, maybe 8 dories left in the Gulf of Carpentaria. There used to be 50, 60 back in the day. And as we talked about, getting the crew to come out and, wanting to stay at sea and work pretty well every day of the week, month, for 4, 5, 6 months, that's more difficult. So I can just continue to see the decline and continue to see the escalating cost where, for a family of 5 to go down to Cairns Esplanade and buy 5 pieces of wildcard mackerel now, it's about $12, crumb battered or fried, they're $70. Throw in, 10, 12, $15 chips, some drinks, you're looking at a family Friday fish and chips, $100 on the Esplanade. That's becoming increasing unaffordable. And as we're seeing with prawns and numerous other top-end seafood, it's becoming solely the domain of the wealthy elite. They're the only ones that are able to go and pay, $25 for a prawn cocktail, John.
Fishing in remote locations demands long spells at sea, with fishermen often relying on third-party supply just to keep out on the water. The importance of a fishing port like Cairns can't be understated.
We've actually cut back on our Spanish mackerel now. We just do the 4 peak months of July, August, September, October. That's why the motherships are running with the prawn season. So we go out, we basically do literally that whole 4 months at sea. We duck in occasionally for a few days into Corumba if we're fishing in that area. Another feature of the Gulf is there's very few ports and infrastructure and wharfage and transport logistics. There's a bit at Weipa, Corumba intermittently. Once you head over to Northern Territory, Groote Island Cove, there's nowhere to unload and refuel other than Darwin. So that makes it very difficult and also makes it vital that we're able to liaise with these motherships that leave Cairns every month. And these motherships are huge. They've got 3 million litres of fuel, million litres of water. And they cart, the cartons, the ice, the food, the spare parts, the mail, the oil. They bring everything up for the northern prawn fishery, 50 boats, the barramundi fishery, the mackerel fishery and the crab industry. So over that next sort of several weeks, the mothership will meet all the various vessels in numerous locations from Cape York to Nullarbor, and then return back to Cairns, empty of fuel, empty of water, and about $30 million of wild-caught Australian seafood, which are unloaded in Cairns and then palletised through one of the freezer processing facilities here in Portsmouth. And then, of course, they're then consigned by the pallet, generally a tonne, off to our numerous buyers. It all ends up in Cairns. So Cairns got a population of about 120,000. On an average year we do, 60 tonne in that 4 months. So that's around 750,000, 750,000 individual serves of wildcard Spanish mackerel. And literally, for the most part, it hits Cairns from the mothership, gets palletised into the freezer, and next day gets consigned to the buyers. And there's a high and increasing demand for wildcard, not just wildcard, for wild-caught Spanish mackerel. So it's literally mostly consumed here in Cairns, John. And I should, for some of your listeners, I should just clarify, it doesn't go into tin cans, it goes into the city of Cairns.
For most people, going to work doesn't include the prospect of facing a man-eating animal. For Wildcard Davey and his crew, massive sharks are just another day at the office.
We've seen numerous restrictions come into our shark fisheries, not just across top-end Australia. It's made it all difficult for those operators to continue with all the legislation and legal requirements of shark fishing. So literally we do not have many shark fishermen left. Like gill netting is banned in Western Australia. highly restricted and very small quotas in Northern Territory and Queensland. So what's happened is we've had a proliferation of sharks. They've just absolutely bounced back, which is wonderful to see because they're also a feature of our tourism business. When people see 30, 40 sharks swimming at the back of the Wildcard, it's like having nature's own aquarium out there. It's really beautiful. So nature, pretty well like us, has the ability to evolve over time, and just like a lion wanting to catch an antelope, doesn't want to run 30 k's around the savannah puffing and panting. It just wants to leap out behind a tree, jump on an antelope and take it home and eat it. So the fish have evolved, particularly in the last 5 and 10 years, to know that when a mackerel jumps onto a lure, it's restricted in its ability to manoeuvre and evade being eaten by a shark. So at any one time, there'll be 30 sharks sitting out the back of our lines while we're trolling, doing 4 knots. And boom, 2 mackerel jump on, and next minute we've got 30 sharks. So we're losing around $40,000, $50,000 a year of mackerel now in certain places to Spanish mackerel, and it's a real challenge, John. There's obviously the safety aspect of that there, and Juanita's had not just Juanita, we've had some serious injuries on the vessel from a shark taking a mackerel when it's been pulled in.
There is a harsh reality of injury when fishing in the Gulf of Carpentaria. In such a remote and desolate location, any injury can mean trouble. A shark attack can have devastating consequences.
Yeah, we all keep an eye on each other. When the 5 dories are out, we're all keeping an eye on each other. And of course, Wildcard's never far away as well. So yeah, it's just a normal day's fishing up at what we call Cape Carnage, which is right up at the 3rd highest point of Australia, straight west of Cape York, and pulling in a mackerel, and a huge shark just came at the back of the boat. When you're pulling the lines in, you wrap the wire with your hand once, and it's just a simple twist, untwist, twist, untwist, into the boat, boom. And she was just about to land a mackerel, and this big shark just came out of nowhere and just literally grabbed the whole shark and gave her a big jerk. It broke her hand in about 5 places, smashed her thumb, her knuckles, her bone, all but severed her little finger off her hand, and then it quartz-whited around behind her knuckles. It just cut her open like a knife going through butter. And suddenly we had this emergency situation. And, this is important with all your safety management systems and your training and everything with, being remote and, sometimes life and death situations. And we've been involved in those situations with other vessels as well. We were able to contact Care Flight in Darwin, and they dispatched the helicopter from Darwin in literally an hour. And I think it was like a 1,600-kilometre round trip from Darwin, refuel at Maningrida, refuel at Elcho Island, out to Cape Carnage. We were sitting on the beach waiting. Chopper landed, picked Juanita up, immediately sedated her and assessed her and dealt with her injuries. They were very serious. And she was back in Royal Darwin Hospital literally 2.5 hours later, and then underwent microsurgery for the next 2 days. Stitched her finger back on. They put plates and pins and all these gauzes and stitched her back together, and she was about 4 months out of action. She's she's not only an inspirational woman and a tough lady. She just took it in her stride. She repaired herself, and she's now back in a dory again. She has a bit of a fear of sharks, particularly up at Cape Carnage, but, a lot of people would say, you should just go and kill those sharks, shoot them, Someone's going to die. We've very much had the view as time go on. I've got to say, it's really my children that's brought this about because, we all know those early heydays of go out and catch as many fish. We've all grown up in modern days fishery management era where we just actually have to have a respect for that, how the wider ecosystem works. And that's everything in it. So in our case, we're just harvesting mackerel. But there's all these other species that are out there too, and some we interact with. They might be the barracuda, which we put back over the side alive. Tuna, we have the highest respect and regard that. And with the sharks, particularly with Juanita's injury, say, oh, well, I'm going to go and kill those. Well, you can't. In today's modern fishing industry, you have to have a high respect and say, you know what, they're a top-end predator. They were here well before me. We just have to learn to deal with the shark issue, which is an increasing issue. It's got to the point now where we have to leave certain areas, John. We're just losing, 10 mackerel in a row, $2,000 worth of fish, so we've just got to pack up and move on.
With the uncertainty of the wild catch fishing industry came a demand for the Davey family to consider how they could best use their unique knowledge and love of the Gulf of Carpentaria. A tourism venture was merely an extension of their enthusiasm for the region and their fish.
We are the luckiest family alive. Look, 6 years ago, John, I took the very bold move. I did a major refit on the Wildcard here in Cairns over 6 months. And we totally gutted the vessel. The vessel's 37 years old now. It was launched in 86. It's in pristine condition inside now, being our home and our only home. We've lived there when I our whole marriage and the kids. And I did so I put in 9 toilets, 11 cabins, big entertainment, commercial kitchen and galley, and we diversified out of solely reliant on the fishing industry into luxury cruising, discovery adventure in East Arnhem Land. Now, that has just taken off. In the last 2 years, we've been totally booked out. We're already booked out 2 years in advance. That's been very popular. So for the February, March, April and the cyclone season, we do adventure discovery, cultural immersion, all the history of the early Dutch and Macassan explorers, etc. Captain Matthew Flinders sailed through there several times. And we do weekly tours out of Gove, fly into Gove, out on the boat for a week, fine dining. We're natural entertainers. They learn about, as I was saying, all the history of the Gulf, get to visit these beautiful island archipelago, the Wessel Islands, the Bromby Islands, English Company Islands. And that has now taken off to the point where we're doing that 6 months straight now. So we do 4 months of the mackerel, straight into the tourism. And we're at sea for 10 months of the year. In fact, John, I've just done nearly an 11-month straight stint at sea. In August, I was on the Wildcard last year mackerel fishing, and I did August, September, October in a dory, and then November, December, we did 6 exclusive fly fishing charters up to the Westwells for permit, bluebone, bastard, barramundi, etc. And then over to Darwin for 2 months refit, December, January. We're back at Gove in February, and then we did 5 months straight. We did 16 charters in 5 months from February, March, April, May, June, right through to the start of our mackerel season this year in July. So a 10-month stint at sea, other than 9 days off for a fishing meeting there. And I've got to say, I think it's been one of my most pleasurable. I'm 64 now, and I'm doing my 48th consecutive season at sea in the Gulf of Carpentaria. I've never missed a year. It was definitely one of my most pleasurable times to be there with your wife, your darling wife, Juanita, and your children, Tom and Jess and Jodie and that, and taking people to your backyard. And it's really interesting to see these people. They join the Wildcard family when they come out on a cruise, but they all seem to know of our heritage, our rich 4-generation heritage going back to Grandpa George. And they're just amazed. So you join the Wildcard for a crew, you actually join the family. And I'm a bit of a natural entertainer, John. I just love talking to people, meeting people, because it's such a contrast from the mackerel. There's just Juanita, Tiger, Tom, Jess, Prue, JD, me on the boat. And then all of a sudden come November, December, I've got 8 other people living in my home, and I'm cooking, cleaning, making their beds, cleaning their toilets and entertaining them. It's quite a contrast, John.
Building a dynasty is no easy feat. Building an intergenerational fishing dynasty is becoming less and less common as the industry shrinks. The Davey family are a very special dynasty in the Australian seafood industry.
I think we all get to our mid-60s and we think, wow, my grandfather, my uncles, my cousins, as I mentioned, all those wonderful, iconic, generational fishing families, in this case New South Wales, the Perellos, the Muslimishis, the Italians, the Greeks, If you're a kid like me delivering the fish with Dad up to the market or whatever, and you'd always stop in at Kiama, these beautiful fishing ports, Wollongong, and they'd be all chatting with all the Italians and the Illawarra Star and all these beautiful old timber vessels, many long since gone. I just love growing up, surrounded by the smell of the fish, the smell of the trawlers. And I was saying, the whole town would literally come down to the public wharf at Greenwell Point at 4 o'clock in the afternoon as all the trawlers that steam back in through the heads up to the wharf. The trucks would be waiting full of ice and everyone would be swinging boxes of John Dory and latchet, gurnard, mowong or lobsters or school prawns or tragline or tuna, and there'd be always something fascinating coming over the wharf onto the truck. And it was a real hive of activity. And it was the centerpieces of those coastal communities now back then. And of course, they were also the economic driver of those communities back then. And you take somewhere like Cairns that used to be one of the largest fishing ports in Australia 20 years ago. It's just shrunk down to a micronism of itself now. We've got poor infrastructure. The industry doesn't have a high regard. There's a lot of conflict with charter and recreational, etc. these days. That's unfortunate. The politics of fishing, John, is increasingly becoming a bit of a drain on one's mind as we sort of wade through what's best for the resource or who's going to utilise the resource. Oh, that's a challenge. But for us, I think we're well established in the industry now, because for my children to go and buy a wildcard or build a wildcard and then have to try and secure access through quota, it's unaffordable to buy for most kids today. And of course, we've got the challenge of having to lease off, dare I say it, the quota barons or the speculators and investors. It's increasingly becoming an issue, and it's increasingly become an issue around the economics of what it costs to put a kilo of wildcard Spanish mackerel on people's plate today, and that's rapidly increasing. Traditionally, fishermen are price takers. They ring the buyers up and say, what's mackerel today? And it's, oh, God, that's not very good. So, there's two types of, sustainability, in this case, the seafood industry, that I like to point out to managers, and that is obviously the resource sustainability. Are we renewing the resource back into the ecosystem so we can harvest, 10, 20% ethically, humanely, sustainably, and then we know we can turn up next season and continue to catch our quota allocations. And then, of course, increasingly we've got the issue of economic sustainability, and that is, if it costs $50,000 to go and fuel the wildcard up, fuel, cartons, ice, insurance, pay the crew from the last trip, etc., 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 am I going to go out and catch $50,000 worth? Because if I'm only going to go and catch $40,000, I'm 10 grand in the hole. That is globally under the current the cost increases, inflationary increases we're seeing. That's becoming a big issue. So for the likes of, say, the prawn trawlers in the Gulf of Carpentaria, competing with imported prawns, competing increasingly with large-scale, good quality prawns and other fishes now, is the economics of those businesses stacking up where they can substantiate the massive investments, millions of dollars? Well, we hope so, because most would know the fishing industry gets no support, John. the fishing industry is happy to stand on its own 2 feet with no subsidies, no assistance, no free kick from the government. It's sink or swim out here. And that's why I think increasingly the industry in our case, particularly the mackerel, will come down to just several key players. It'll come down to several, investors increasingly buying up those quota holdings. And we can just hope that we can continue to put our seafood on the plates of Australia at a price they can afford, because if they can't, John, they will find alternatives. They certainly will.
Wildcard Davey and his family, fishing on the vast ocean in the extremely remote Gulf of Carpentaria, travel over 10,000 miles each fishing season, which is nearly halfway around the world, chasing their beloved Spanish mackerel. It's as much as a commitment to ensuring Australians have access to great Australian seafood as it is their passion. As a family enterprise who fish and live together, they are a truly special group of people. Check out their adventures on the YouTube series Lord of the Macs to get a visual taste of what, where and how they do what they do. It's amazing. This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. A Deep in the Weeds production. I'm John Sussman. Follow us on Instagram at Fishtales Seafood Podcast, or email us at fishtalespodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay tuned for more tales from beneath the surface of the seafood world every Friday on your podcast app.